Well, food has been a big part of today's unexpected and unwelcome increase in inflation. A short-term factor has been that shortage of salad items that you mentioned last month. That's been due to bad harvests overseas and high energy prices here at home. So if you look at cucumber prices up almost 10%, tomato prices up almost 6%. But there's a longer, bigger problem here with food. If you look at all sorts of things, whether it's bread, chicken, cheese, milk, you name it, they're all up by huge amounts over the last 12 months. Total food inflation is now running at more than 18%. And of course, a lot of these items are essentials for the family. It's very difficult for people to switch to alternatives. At the same time, clothing prices are also up. The price of alcohol in restaurants and hotels is also up. So the squeeze on living standards is by no means over.
So how might all of this affect the Bank of England's decision on interest rates tomorrow?
Well, the bank has raised interest rates at its last 10 meetings, and there was some speculation it might take a break tomorrow, not least because of all the turmoil we've seen in the banking system that's taken out Credit Suisse and 3 banks in the United States over the last couple of weeks. I think today's inflation figures really wrest that debate back into the camp that the bank is probably going to carry on raising interest rates. You can see here inflation has shot up over the last 2 years, hit more than 11% in October, what we assume is the peak, started to fall away, and the assumption was it would carry on falling this year. But today, of course, it's peaked back up to 10.4%, so that trend has been broken. Worth reminding ourselves that line down the bottom, 2% is what inflation is meant to be. So with inflation very high and now today actually going up, I think there's a general assumption the bank will have to raise rates tomorrow, perhaps by about 0.25%.
So do you reckon that inflation is going to stay high then?
Look, inflation should still fall because gas and electricity prices have been a big part of the inflationary problem, and they went up very sharply last April. So when we get to this April, that big increase is going to drop out of what is an annual inflation rate calculation. So inflation should fall this year, even if it's mainly for statistical reasons. Of course, always important to emphasise we're not talking about prices falling, we're talking about inflation going up slightly slower.
And there is a decision today on interest rates from the US central bank, the Federal Reserve, isn't there? Yeah,
just about an hour ago, the US central bank, the Federal Reserve, has raised interest rates by a quarter point to 4.75%. There's been speculation that the Federal Reserve might also not act because of the banking situation, but tonight they've talked about still being attentive to the risks linked to inflation. They do accept that the problems in banking are likely to slow the economy and hit the jobs market, but right now they're saying the fight against inflation still takes priority.
Neil, thanks very much. Well, earlier I spoke to Minette Batters, the president of the National Farmers Union, and began by asking how families were supposed to afford these eye-watering prices for basic food.
It's been an absolutely perfect storm, and the same thing is what our farmers and growers are facing into. They've seen triple-digit inflation on all of their costs. That's raw materials for feed ingredients, that's fertiliser, energy, fuel. Triple-digit inflation on fertiliser that last year went up to nearly £1,000 a tonne. Farmers and growers have been facing into this extraordinary cost inflation situation with their input costs, and in many cases unable to pass it on up the chain.
So are supermarkets, some of them, doing rather well out of this cost of living crisis, sneaking some price increases in, perhaps over and above what they need to?
It's a really difficult situation to work out quite what is going on. There's certainly some that are doing absolutely the right thing. There are some where, quite honestly, the transparency and the contractual relationship between the farmer or the grower and the retailer or the packer is not good enough. I mean, last year, as an example, we saw nearly 1 billion less eggs produced in 2022 compared to 2019. Now, we asked the government to use the powers that they have in the Agricultural Act, Section 20, to deal with exceptional market circumstances. They didn't do that. I think they should have done. It was a clear market failure situation. So we need to see complete transparency, and I would say we need to see structural reform of how these relationships are working.
Well, what other simple things could the government have done before this point? And do you think price controls should be considered now? Is it that much of an emergency?
Here, quite honestly, we need to treat food security the same way as we treat energy security. We've asked for a food surveillance unit that would do exactly the same as what is in place for energy, the systems operator at the moment. If that had been in place, we'd have been able to horizon scan what has been coming towards us, and we'd have been able to do something about it.
To what extent do you think that Brexit has contributed to this problem?
I think Brexit has definitely contributed to this problem. I think we have failed to prepare enough for what being an independent trading nation looks like. But this is resolvable if you have a plan in place. And I think, you know, the whole situation has been driven by not taking domestic food security seriously. The Prime Minister himself back in August said he wanted to see a new self-sufficiency figure, he wanted to see a statutory reporting, and that he himself, as Prime Minister, would host a food security summit every year. Now, I'm told that is going to happen, but that was in August, and quite honestly, now here we are at the end of March, and there's still no sign of it. Staff
Shortages are also driving up costs, so I wonder if you'd like agricultural workers to be added to the shortage occupation list.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, the situation in dairy at the moment, there is an absolute crisis in the permanent workforce in many sectors of agriculture and food production. We need to see them added to the worker shortage occupation list. Last year, we wasted £60 million worth of crop that was just left to rot in the fields. And that, with a cost of living crisis, is quite honestly totally unacceptable.
Minette Batters, thanks very much.
Thank you.